Hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to present Dion McCormick, no relation, our lead solutions engineer and founder of Giant Killer Training, who's here today to go over a couple demonstrations based on questions that people had sent in. But we're also here to take your questions live. So you can send those questions to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com. Also joining us shortly will be Sarah Mitchell, who's in charge of our documentation department. Will be here to answer questions as well. So you can go ahead now and type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. All right, let's get started. Hello, Dion, are you there?
Yes, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. Let me go ahead and make you the
Great.
presenter.
Yes, please.
And
There we go. Should have pretty decent internet
there
today.
you are. Excellent. Yep.
Yeah, popped right up. Good. Hey, well, thank you, everybody. It is September. Dun, dun, dun. We are, I don't know, when does summer end? Are we over summer? I'm not sure. We're getting close to fall. You know, the only downside.
It's not even Labor Day yet. Don't
That's this weekend. We're almost there. Yeah,
All
everybody.
right, yeah, I know. But then there's a couple weeks technically after. I hold out to the actual solstice. I think that's the 21st.
I'm hoping. You know, the downside this year is, you know, or college football is not going to start on time, so
No.
it just doesn't see the same. Darn COVID, evil COVID. But thank you everybody for joining us. We really appreciate it. We are in September, and we are super excited to have you with us. We actually have a presentation today. The presentation will focus on a question from one of our developers that sent it into guides@alphasoftware.com. So I highly encourage everybody to take time. Obviously, we're here. You have the Q&A section of your GoToWebinar control panel. Please put any questions you have in there. We'll do our best to address them. But always, you can send them ahead of time to guides@alphasoftware.com. Allows us to get a little ahead of the curve and be prepared to answer those questions as quickly as possible. So we'll cover that in a little bit here. One thing I did want to cover is we are in September, and we're literally a little over a month away from the Alpha Devcon 2020. Going to be a fantastic event. So if you haven't already signed up, go to alphasoftware.com/devcon2020. Get signed up there. Not only do we have some great training sessions, we have some excellent demonstrations of new features. We also have the fabulous roadmap and talks with our developers. This is going to be a phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal event, and we're very excited about it. And we look forward to having everybody at Devcon 2020. Again, just around the corner. We're feverishly working on making sure everything's ready to go, so we have an amazing, amazing event, and I can't wait personally about that. So go there. I'm going to go ahead and grab that real quick and put it into the chat window in case you want a quick and easy way to catch there. So beyond that, what we're going to talk about today is a little bit more about user interface work, specifically the UX component and fields on that component. So the question came in from our esteemed developer to say, hey, you know, I use fields, I want to show and hide them. There's different ways to do that. You know, they were asking what are the best practices, and really importantly, what are the different ways you can do it? So I'm going to walk through a number of those today, talk a little bit about how I use visibility on fields and things like that, and my preferred methodologies to be able to do this. And I find that it's really, really kind of a base core knowledge, which is helpful, which I think a fair amount of people have a good feel for, but you know, there are some newer folks who just don't really haven't used the technology as much. There are some nuances that are associated with that. So today we're going to focus on that. And then obviously with if you have any questions, please go to your the Q&A section and put them in there. We'll monitor them both on the topic I'm presenting today, but also on any other topics that you may desire. So I'm going to jump over to our development environment and go ahead and move into that section here. So I'm in my project. This is called my sandbox. This is where I do my little demonstrations and things like that. One quick note is that we're getting a little better now. When after demos are done, we are posting our sample content onto our repository. And I have to say thank you to Sarah because she's really driving that initiative. So the beauty of that is that if you're interested in getting a copy of this, we're going to be much more efficient about having those available for you online through our repository. And also the nice thing about that too is it becomes a historical record. So if you're saying, I saw a webinar about 3 weeks, and by the way, we're getting everything up to date, so that 3 weeks may be an issue today. But our goal is that if you go, I saw a webinar, it's about 3 weeks ago, we can go to the repo and pull down those examples and samples and demonstrations without you having to give us an email or things like that. We're trying to, smooth things out, get a little less
And if I
friction in the
could just
process.
add to that,
Oh, yes,
along
please.
with Sarah, Scott Allen on our team here, many people have met him before, is actually going through the YouTube video library, and for our different sessions has put the links right there into the comments. So when you find a particular video that's the right video, you don't have to go digging through to find the link to the right thing. So we're going to hopefully keep that up to date because I know that those are popular.
Yep. Oh, by the way, as you note in your chat, which I am not going to argue with, please allow 7 to 10 business days for us to pry the sample components from Dion's PC. Now, I'm working to improve on that, but that's probably a valid assumption there in terms of that. It sounds like, please allow 7 to 10 business days and include $4.95 in shipping and handling.
Exactly. It used to be 4 to 6 weeks, though, in the old days.
Yeah. No, we're going to tighten that baby up. In fact, eventually, I might actually do the thing, the UX beforehand and actually have it in there before the demo. God forbid. Then, the earth will shatter, the sky will open up, and we'll know the end of days is here. So awesome. Okay, so let's dive right in. I'm going to go into my web component. Now, do note you have field visibility in grid and UX, meaning like if you have grid and you have certain columns, similar techniques that I'm going to show you today work for the grid and the UX. In fact, the grid was before the UX, so a lot of the core functional technologies were developed there. So what you'll see is it's a little different, some of the terminology, but the reality is the methodology, how you do these things are very similar in both the grid and UX. Again, we're going to focus today on the UX, but feel free that if you're doing a grid, you'll be able to use the same techniques there. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new UX here. Again, I'm not going to use any template or anything like that. I'm going to start with a simple UX. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and add a text box. Enter data. I'm going to call this one, I'm going to make 2 of them, data 1, data 2. Just generic text boxes on my screen. And you know what? I like to have this all nicely formatted, so I'm going to use the technique I've showed you before, which I highly recommend, is that you save preferred structural code or controls in your library and pull those out so that within a few moments, you have a nicer looking, ready to go starting point for your UX. So I'm going to go visibility, demonstration, UX. Okay. So I haven't done anything super special on this. Yeah, I'll use that. I'll go. I like compact theme. So we'll go ahead and do a working preview and show you what it looks like. So we have just a very basic data entry form. So you'll see we have, the ability to enter data in there. I haven't data bound this. I haven't done anything. So it really doesn't do much other than look nice and have that ability to enter data in there. So the key question is, and this is first and foremost, there are 2 primary ways for you to control visibility. And they're both powerful in their own right. And I want to go over those really quick first in terms of what they are. So when you control visibility, and I'm going to go ahead and go here to controls and select one of my controls and go over here. And first and foremost, there is just the hide function. This is built in where you can click hide, and that's hard coded. And when you run this thing, it's hidden and you're done. That's it. You notice that data 1 is now disappeared. Now, this is sort of the brute force techniques, but a valuable one because you may want to hide specific fields that you don't want to show the user, but you still want them as part of your application, meaning over your form. So maybe some hidden fields with certain metadata that go along with your data that's saved to the form. And because those fields are available on the interface, you can do XBasic, you can do JavaScript, you can do everything else you want to manipulate the data in those fields behind the scenes, and the user will never see it. So step number one is if you want to hide a field, you can click hide, and this will just immediately do that, and you won't see that field, although it will still be present and available for use by your application. So that's step number one. Now, the important thing, and kind of back to there, is there's two ways you can control visibility in an application. And you'll see what I'm doing is scrolling down to my properties, to the lower part of my properties tab for my specific field. And you'll see that there are two areas you can control it: show hide server side, and then show hide client side. So your two methods are server side or client side. Now, I'm going to come back to my preferences in a bit, but both are valid. Both have pros and cons. So the important thing is that where is the sort of the show hide calculated? Is it done on the local browser or is it done on the server? Well, if it's server side show hide, then it is done on the server. So that show hide is immediately handled by the server, and you don't have any control after that. Now, the show hide for client side is applied at the browser or client side, either mobile or browser from there. So the reality is the client side is far more flexible because the client side works immediately. It does not have to talk to the server. To reevaluate this expression, you have to talk to the server. So, but there are benefits. The nice thing about the server side is you control it all there. You're able to sort of set sort of high level. You know that when the person sees it, the server is going to dictate what's going on there. The benefit of the client side show hide expression is the fact that it is handled at the client, so it's more dynamic, meaning that when you have interactions of the user and the form on the web browser mobile device client side, on the fly immediately, you can modify the show hide situation. And I'll show you that in a few moments here. So the nice thing about that is that it makes your user interface more dynamic. You don't have to go talk to the server to do things adjust-wise. You can just do them immediately. And since they're implemented in JavaScript, they're essentially evaluated immediately, which is really handy. Now, on the client side, I want to let you know there's also the enable and read-only expression. And you'll see there's some comments down here. Let me go ahead and bring this up a little bit in terms of what that does here. So enable, show hide expression, and read only. So all of these here are handled at the client side. So if you put any expression in here, then what will happen is it will get evaluated. And in one case is show hide, the other is it will enable that control, and the other is it will make it read only. And so you can say, for this particular situation, I want to read only. So before I dive into that a little bit more, I want to talk about the show hide expression and give you a demonstration here. So let's say there is a parameter when they log in. Let's say we set what's called a session variable. And that session variable is set when the person logs in that maybe says, this person can do these things or can't do this, or they're part of this group or something like that. There's many different ways to handle. This is not a substitute for security. We'll talk about that in a few moments here. But what I want to talk about is, more importantly, the ability for you to kind of craft your own sort of parameters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to server side events. I'm going to go to the on dialog initialize, and I'm going to mimic that somewhere in our system we set a session variable. And let's just go ahead and say, let's see, I'm sorry, session dot, let's call it division. Let's say it's division, like, there are divisions within a company, and I set that up based on what's going on there. And I'll call that the alpha division. So I'm going to go into my controls. So basically, I've set this session at the server level. So remember, this is assessed at the server level and then made available. So I'm going to go here to controls, I'm going to go to the show hide expression. I'm going to open, and you'll notice there's some help down here. Now, the cool thing about the show hide expression is that you can directly refer to session variables. So you'll notice down here, I can say if session.var1 is equal to alpha. So I'm going to go ahead and go in here and I'm going to say if session.var, I'm not var1, but division is equal to alpha, what I'm saying is that if that session variable is equal to alpha, then this is able to be valued or seen. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to data 2. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go session.division is equal to beta. So I'm setting it to say, okay, the people in the alpha division get this field, the people in the beta division get this field. So let's go ahead and save this, and let's do a little run and see what happens. So when this launches, you'll notice one thing. That little piece of code where I set the session variable ran before it showed me the screen, set the session variable, and now when it's displayed to the user will see whether, you'll notice we're only seeing one field here because this is the data field for division alpha and the other one's for division beta. So if I go back to server side and I say, you know what, that's actually beta. So let's say someone else logged in and I set their division setting to be that. Then I go into working preview and you'll see that data 2 is now shown, data 1 is missing. So the assessment is done using server-side information, not client-side information. So it decides, oh, guess what? You're with division beta. Okay, so I'm going to show you these fields. Oh, you're not in alpha. I'm not going to show you this. And it's handled there. And you can create some very sophisticated scenarios to be able to do that kind of scenario. You could calculate some session variables before you show the UX. It could depend on many different things on the server and then show the person from there. Now, what I want to do is actually I wanted to point something out since we're going ahead and talking about visibility. You'll notice something. There's like a little gap here. So data 1 and data 2 are on top of each other, but it's showing there. And that's what's called, and so what's happening is that the reason that's showing up is that we're not basically sort of compressing this here. So the way to do that is go to your controls, go to your data 1, and over here, I'm going to scroll all the way back up the top. You'll see something here called control container prevent float. And you see there's a whole description about that there. But I'm going to go ahead and select that. And I'm going to go to data 2, and I'm going to select that too. We didn't really see it on data 2 because it's kind of, at the end, so you wouldn't see it. But let's go ahead and try this again. So let's do a working preview. And, oh, I'm still got a little gap. I think that one, let's see, did I set control float? That shouldn't have gone there. So that will prevent it from being seen. I find that using containers is a little better on the container float stuff. And so we'll come back, but this allows you to basically get rid of that gap information on there. We'll come back and visit that a little in a few moments. And I think it's more on the client side that we see that more effect. But if you're starting to see, like, if you had like 10 controls here and all of a sudden you see gaps where the ones are invisible, then you'll know that you need to do the control container float. So that is kind of talking about server side. Again, evaluated on the server and handled by the server before it's delivered to the person on the client there. But now what I'd like to do is kind of dive into the client side. Now, the reality is I do almost all my stuff on client side because there's so much more flexibility. Also, I can consistently set up things. By the way, and I'll mention in a moment, if you need to use session variables for client side, you can do that. So it's sort of like a meta capability than the server side, and I just find it much more flexible. So word-wise, I wanted to kind of let you know about the server side functionality, but try and do stuff on the client side. You'll find often that it just turns out nicer. It gives you a lot more flexibility and really the way to focus there. So first thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and get rid of my server side show hide expressions because I don't want those to be conflicting with my client side activity. And by the way, server side dominates over client side. So it's gonna evaluate server stuff before it ever gets to the browser or the client. And again, you can use both if you want. I mean, there's certain scenarios you want to do that, but just be aware you may get weird things if they're conflicting with each other, like, oh, it should be showing up, it's not. where is that happening? So I tend to be consistent in terms of my items, in terms of using the client side from there. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another thing here. I'm going to call it control. And it's just a text box I want to add right here. So I have a control right here, and I'm going to just be able to use that as my control function in my application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to data one, and I'm going to go ahead and go back to my show hide expression. Going to open that up. And now this is a little differently. You know, by the way, if you're doing server side stuff, it's, let me go back up to server side, excuse me. Right. That speeds it up. Okay. This is kind of using XBasic and things like that. You're going to still use a similar nomenclature in here, but it's going to translate this to JavaScript. So there is a little bit difference in terms of how you write things from the expression wise. You'll get used to it. It's very straightforward from there. So what I want to do is I'm writing what's called an expression. And this expression, again, is going to be evaluated on the client side. So what I want to do is I want to look at my control field, and based on what happens there, I want to either show or hide my data one. So I'm going to insert a field here, and I'm going to pick my field here, control. And notice it's just referring to the name of the field here. I'm going to go equal to alpha. Now notice I'm not writing it in JavaScript. I'm writing it in sort of an XBasic style there, but this will be translated into JavaScript for me. Now, to make sure I understand how to do that, you'll notice there's a help on syntax rules. When I click this, this gives you all the information on how to write those expressions here. One of the most important things, and this is probably the most confusing for a lot of people, is that you're using basically an XBasic, but you don't use, for instance, the .and, .or, .not. So it's a kind of a hybrid thing. And in most of them, you'll get, it's pretty easy to understand. But if you have a question, just click on this help on syntax rules. Gives you some examples of how to do equals, ors, things like that. Notice, very important down here, I'm referring to session.state. So I can actually use session variables in there, but super important, and we'll come back to that in a moment, these have to be what are called published session variables. So let me go ahead and do this first kind of round, and then I'll go back and show you that so you understand how to use the session variable in your client side, which is kind of cool because now instead of having the server side up here and the client side, you can do everything in one place, which helps with your debugging and making sure everything works properly. So that's your rules on terms of how to do it. So I made a very simple one. I said, hey, if control has the word alpha in it, show data one. I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And I'm going to click OK. Now I'm going to go to data two, and I'm going to open the show hide expression. I'm going to paste the same in there, but I'm going to use my beta. So very similar to what I showed you a few minutes ago, but all of this is going to be dynamic. So watch what happens. Let's go ahead and click save, and let's see what it looks like here. So you'll see first and foremost, nothing is showing, and that is valid because what these two fields are doing is looking to this field right here, and it's looking for the word either alpha or beta. It didn't find either of those, so it said, sorry, I'm not going to show these. So let's go ahead and just type something in. So I'm going to say ALPH and then hit A, and notice what happened. The moment I entered that field here, it immediately showed my field, or the word alpha, which is my division name, showed that field here. Same thing if I go beta, you'll notice now the data one went away and data two is displayed. And you can see it's all handled. There's no server callbacks. And that's one of the most important parts of it. Because when someone's filling out a data form, the powerful way of using this is saying, oh, they entered something in one field. It could be a drop down or a checkbox or whatever. Then I want to show them some other fields to make sure they can enter the data the way I want them to. So it's very powerful to create dynamic forms where certain fields will ask for other fields depending on the discussion or depending on how you want your logic to work and what's in those fields there. Now, another thing that's important is notice when I went like this, you'll notice that the control is still shown. It's only when I exit out of that it executes it. So it's looking for essentially the on change event where it loses focus from this and moves to another. So if I go alpha and I click out of it, you'll notice that it sort of set the value of this control that immediately behind the scene triggered this evaluation. And that's one of the cool things about the client-side expression. I don't have to worry about watching, well, what field is referring to this field and this field there. All I have to do is sort of set declarative rules on each of my fields, and the field itself will be watching things and saying, oh, look, that changed. Oh, I better look at myself. Oh, yeah, I need to go ahead and hide myself or show myself and do it. So it becomes very efficient to create very complex forms because you're not sitting there having to write a whole bunch of logic saying, okay, like, I could do something very similar with the on change event, like the here it's the on change event under my JavaScript. I could write a little piece of JavaScript that says, well, when this field's changed, go this field and set the visibility yes or no and things like that. Too much work, way too much work. I'd rather just pick a field, set a declarative statement, and then it will watch this field for me automatically. When that turns to true, you're good to go. By the way, if I want to always hide this, go ahead and copy that. You could also go like this. This is the equivalent to clicking that hide button up top, 1 = 0, because that will always go to false. And if it's false, it's not going to show that field. Now, what's cool about this is that same technique of show hide expression works for enable and read only. So now not only can you tell whether the field is visible, you may have a situation where you want to say, you know what, I always want them to see that field, but I don't necessarily want them to be able to edit it. Maybe there's some valuable information they need to see in that field, so I can do that. So, but it may be sets of fields. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this out of here, and I'm going to go ahead and put the enable expression here for data 2. And let's see what the behavior looks like for that. So you'll notice right away, instead of having nothing there, I see data 2, but I'm clicking. Here you go. Hear that clicking right there? I'm clicking on data 2, nothing's happening. Now watch, I'm going to type in beta, and now I can click in there and start editing that data. So not only can you show hide, you use the same principle to basically control read only or control enabled. And those have different sort of reasons for existing. If you go show hide and enable, enable and read, it will talk about different things. This mainly goes to like pickers. And so you can read through this to kind of show how they're a little subtly different in terms of how you're going to use them from there. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this and put that here. Now, as we mentioned, one of the cool things I can do is if I wanted to go ahead, and we're going to show how to refer to session variables in a moment, but I could do something like this, and this could be equally consistent. This control, by the way, does not have to be shown. It could be hidden somewhere else. So long as it's present and on the user interface, so long as it's there, then all the other fields will refer to it. So let me show you something I use sometimes to kind of bring visibility. So what I'm going to do is go to server-side events. I'm going to go session.division equal to beta, and then I'm going to go e.control. I know probably not the best way to there. This is e.control, and then this is my field name right here, is equal to session.division. So one technique is I could grab all my information out of out of my other like my session variables, whatever's happening, and then I can then set that value of that hidden control or control that's seen to that. So let's go ahead and watch what happens here. And you'll notice that, this was set by that little command. So now I have beta, and you'll notice that since this is beta, this starts showing. So one of the techniques I use, and I often use it, is that if I have a pretty complex scheme, I may want to kind of see, what that value is. I really like using declarative where I can just click and point to a hidden control. So what I'll do is I'll hide this control. I'll unhide it when I'm doing development because I kind of want to see, am I setting the values of that? And is that triggering the right behavior on the form? But then what I can do is that when I'm ready to go, I will take this control right here and hide that control so the user can't see it. but I'm still updating and maintaining it from there. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, and so again, that's helpful when you have a more complex scenario, because during debug time, you might want to see kind of what this, the value of this is, because this might dynamically change based on different characteristics. So during debug, I can kind of watch that and say, yeah, that looks right. Oh, this field's not showing, so it must not be set up correctly. But then once I go live, I kind of hide it from there. Now, another thing that's kind of powerful, and this is very, very powerful, is that you'll notice we've set our show hide expressions on the specific fields themselves. So I'm going to go ahead and do this, and I'm going to surround this with a container. And I'm just going to use a regular container. Now I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to go to the client-side show AI expression. I'm going to say control is equal to beta. And I'm going to go back here to server side and just, so that's not defaulted there. Okay. So now you'll notice something that when I go on, nothing's shown, but now I can say beta and notice, data 2 is showing. Now, the reason only data 2 is showing is because I still have my rules on my fields. So I can actually, let's go ahead and get rid of the rules on the individual fields. So I'll get rid of those. So there's no rules on these fields anymore. And we'll get rid of that. I'll do working preview. And I'll go ahead and type beta in here. And notice all those fields are shown. So kind of cool is you can mix and match fields. Like you can mix and match field level rules with container level rules. So you're not having to go in and, let's say you had a form, and if they had a certain situation you wanted to show 5 other data fields to fill out, well, super important is that I don't have to go through every one of those fields. I can surround them with a container. Now I want to go back and talk about something that was important that I kind of talked about a moment ago. So let's go to calculated field expression. Oh, that's calculated field expression. Excuse me. I want show hide expression. Excuse me. I apologize. There we go. Alpha. Now, remember when I was mentioning a little earlier, and I kind of went off the rails there, is that I was talking about the container float. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to my container here. I'm going to get rid of all that. So I'm just going to do the containers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this container and go here. And I'm going to take here and I'm going to put a container here, turn around it. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and grab my rules, and I'm going to apply the visibility rules to the container level. And I'm doing this for 2 reasons I'll explain in a moment. There's control and go here. So I'm kind of doing field level, but I'm doing it by surrounding it with a container, implying the rule at the container level. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on each of these containers and I'm going to click here, prevent container float. Actually, let me turn that off first. So we've got 2 containers here, and they kind of work now to hide and show that. So let's go ahead and look and see what's going on here. So initially, they're both no container. And so I'm going to go beta, and notice data 2 shows up there. But notice that it's very tight. I've found, and this is just a personal thing, is that if you use containers and apply the show hide at the container level, I get tighter interfaces. I don't have little missing gaps and things like that because I use this control container the prevent float on there, and it just behaves a lot nicer. So unless I have like a bunch of stuff, I put containers because I can group controls in there and do other things like that. Now, there's a word of caution I need to really go into right now. And this is very important because this has cost me lots and lots of time in the past. That is, as you start building your forms, you're going to start doing things like, for instance, you're going to say, oh, I've got a validation rule, like for instance, that this is a required value in data 2. And that's natural. You want to do that. You want to enable those rules. Now, here's the trick. And it depends on how you set up your error stuff, but this is a common mistake I make. I'll set up my form, my UX. I'll set all this and I'll have certain things hidden and shown. And then I'll enable rules on the data fields for like forcing certain requirements. Then I'll launch and I'll start using my form and I'll click the submit button and then nothing will happen. It will just do nothing. Well, usually what that happens, or the reason that occurred, is that I had a field that was hidden for some reason, either through a server side or client side. And on that field, it had a validation rule. And the problem is I wasn't seeing that the validation rule was failing, meaning that, it would show me a little message like either like a red icon next to it or there, but that's done at the field level. So the problem you have there is that if the field is hidden, the error notification that's with that field is also hidden. Now there's two ways around that. One is you just got to be careful and kind of set that up. The other method you can use, and I'll go ahead and just do this here, if you go to the properties and type error, there are different ways to do error styling. And what that means is how are we going to present that error to the user? So when you set a sort of validation on a field, you can dictate it at the top level how you want it to show. As you can see, there's different ones. Block is under the field. Oops, that's where I had my problem. If it's block, it's under the field is hidden, guess what? The error message is also hidden by default. So that I've just spent time where I'm like hammering my head against the wall going, I know everything's right, the data's right, everything else, and I just didn't realize there was a hidden field, especially for more complex stuff. That was the error was on that hidden part, and so rightfully so, it was throwing an error and not allowing me to submit that form, but I didn't know that was happening on there. You can also use tip, but again, that's over the field icon, and then you can use global, display all errors in a single location. So one potential fix for this is use global, put a error notification like up in the top, and therefore any errors. Now, I kind of like the field to show the error right there, but hey, it depends on what you're doing. So one is be careful, others maybe use global, put it at the top in a position where when they save it, they'll see it very readily. It can refer to the field that has the problem, and that will do it from there. So again, that's just kind of a word to the wise about the issue of having a hidden field which has validation on it. You may run into a little weirdness there. Just be careful and you can unhide and see where those problems are at from there. Now I want to cover one other thing, then I want to open it up for questions, and that was the following. Remember when we went here to like container 2 and we looked at the show height expression, and in our syntax rules it said, oh, guess what? You can use session variables, okay? So remember, we're going to set the session variable here at this level, session.division. Now, what I want to do is use this information in my expression on my field. I have to do one other thing very important. Session variables by default are invisible to the client because they're server-side entities. But what we can do is tell the UX we want to show the client and have that server session side information available. And the way you do that is to go to the properties for the UX, click properties, type session, and you'll see there's something here called published session variables. Double click on that. And there's a section called published session variables. So I'm going to open that. And this is where you type in which session variables you want to show on the client to be available for not only this expression, but also JavaScript. So I'm going to type session, and you should use uppercases. And I'm going to say division. So notice I'm referring to session.division, and I'm putting it in uppercase. If I actually want to set it, I could set it right here, and it would set it right in here on the way. But usually I set it in XBase because that's where I'm doing my session stuff, and just telling the UX, make this available to the client side. Now notice down below, there's a little helpful hint that's saying if you want to use it in your JavaScript for whatever reason, your own JavaScript, you can use this built-in function that says dialog object get session variable and the session name. Very important, if you haven't put that session variable here, this will fail. So this depends on you coming in here and setting that session variables. So let's go back here, go to our container here, And now I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say control is equal to, or I'm just going to say session division is equal to beta. So I'm essentially replicating my server side, but at the client side level. I'm saying, well, go look at session division. I published it to the client side and make sure it's equal to beta. And if I haven't screwed this up, we'll see beta is being shown. Let's go back in here just to make sure it's true. Let's go ahead and set this to alpha, do a working preview, and you'll see it's missing. So that's how you can use session variables on the show hide expression here. Now, what's really great about this is now I never have to, I always do my stuff at the client side. That way I kind of know it's in one spot. I go there, I know it's gone, but I can mix and match. And I can say, and for instance, control is equal to beta. So I can mix sort of server side information with client side information in my expressions, so I can create very, very powerful kind of expressions. So like for instance, think of this, and control. So the first one is saying, okay, can they see it? And also, is there a certain set equal to beta? It's sort of like, for the person to be able to see this, is everything set up on the server side? Is everything set up on the client side? Yes, it passes all these rules. They can see that information there. So that's a really nice thing. You can kind of mix what's going on the client with what's on the server to get the result you want. Now, super important again, make sure you've published your session variables before trying to use that, and make sure when you're referring to session variables that it is all in upper cases. Otherwise things won't work properly from there. One last note, this is not to replace the security groups functionality. Security groups overrules everything. It's like the one ring to rule them all. Basically, what's going to happen is when the system renders this UX, it's first going to look at security groups. I don't have them enabled here, but it's going to say, for instance, this container is only available to the administrator group. It'll apply that first before it applies server side and client side. So the reality is that it goes, the hierarchy is server side, security, server side, and then client side. So what I do is I still use the high level security for like that important stuff, like this person shouldn't see this field, and that's locked in the security. It's very, very reliable. But then I use the client side with a mix of session and stuff to sort of to apply that dynamic situation for the UX and be able to do that there. So again, just realize security groups takes rules over everything. It's the number one determiner whether you're going to see stuff or not. But then you can use server side and client side, but with the session availability, you can use the show hide there. One last note, and then I'll open up for questions, is that one other thing you can do is, oh, no, that's good. That's all I wanted to cover there. I don't want to confuse it anymore. So with that, Dave, I'd like to go ahead and open it up for any questions on this, and also if you have any other questions with other stuff. But I hope this helps give you a better, fuller understanding of how you can use this both server side and client side to do some very powerful things. And remember, it's not only show hide you're able to do, go back down here, but you can also use it for enable and read only scenarios using the same exact techniques as show hide.
Terrific. So related to the thing we just mentioned ago regarding security groups, someone asked, well, if you're using the client side show hide, that data is still somewhere in the browser, right? So for example,
That is correct.
You wouldn't want to use it for secure information that you're hiding from the user because because the user isn't authorized to see it. You might just hide it because it's in the way and it would be clutter to the user. But so you'd really want to use security groups if you're using client-side properties, if you're trying to hide sensitive information. Would that be
That is
accurate?
very true. Very, very.
Okay,
That's
great.
what the core of the security will do for you.
Excellent.
Yeah, because they could open up the HTML and the DOM and look at the source and see some hidden information in there, because the client-side stuff has to be there for the JavaScript. Behind the scenes, it's running JavaScript to look at stuff, so it has to have those rules in JavaScript that are kind of encoded. So you could dig that out. Absolutely. Good point.
Another question is there a way to programmatically set show and hide for multiple controls in the UX all at once? I think you were just doing it against a single control.
Okay, run that by me again real quick. I just want to make sure I understand. Is there a way?
Is there a way to programmatically set show hide for multiple controls in the UX all at once?
Oh, interesting, like on the fly. I'm not sure if you can modify the show hide expression on the fly. What you
But you
can do
could,
though,
yeah,
I mean, if you're like just trying to get that, you can select show hide expression and then copy it to other fields. That's for quick and dirty if you want to, if you have
right.
separate fields, you want to do that. Programmatically, again, this is declarative structure. So you set the expression on the controls and you let alpha kind of figure it out from there. And I usually use hidden controls as my mechanism because then I can show those to kind of during testing and then hide them when not needed later on.
Ah, great. Yep, that should work. Thanks.
Yeah, I hope that answered. I'm not sure. If it not, put it in the questionnaire and let me know.
Excellent. Next up, what if a field is required if it's showing, but not required when it's hidden? Could you set something up like that? Would that be possible?
That's a really good point. The not that I know of within the declarative structure, but remember when you let me go ahead and add a submit button. Let's just say we were going to submit this bad boy. So I'll go define controls, go to submit reset. So it puts these buttons in there. I go into submit. You'll see that the submit is running this. So you can put in JavaScript here to check that situation. And if it's good, you submit it. If not, you throw up like an alert or trigger a transient message for them to see. So I don't know of a way to do it kind of within there, but you could easily on the submit here, and this occurs before it goes to the server, so you can trap it before it ever gets off of the client up to the server.
Excellent. Let me read through this one here. Right. Okay. So here's related to the last question.
Oh, good.
They have a field that is sometimes required, but sometimes not required for whatever reason. Like, for example, you might say there's a checkbox which says have children, and then another field which now says how many children do you have.
Kind of a cascading scenario.
Exactly. Is there a way to conditionally make something required?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can in this logic here for show hide expression, you can build enormous number. You can do if thens, you can do lowers, rights. I mean, you basically have all the power of JavaScript to be able to do that here. So yeah, you could make it conditional by updating your sort of hide expression, saying in this scenario with these kind of like if these three other fields are this way, if this thing, then go ahead and show it. If these three fields are this way, do it from there.
Now that's for showing and hiding. Back in the validation section, what types of validations are available? Is it just a simple
good
yes,
point.
no, or could you make it a little bit smarter and say, I want this to be required under the following circumstances?
Oh, I see. Conditional. Okay, so the field validation, the easy one to do here is you basically it's enforced at this level here.
Right.
You can but there's another method here is that you can use either validation XBasic or validation JavaScript.
Okay.
So the issue is you're going to have to write the little code, but for instance, you can say under this scenario, do the validation by looking at other fields, etc.
Right. So if field A is set to true, then I want this. Then I'm not allowed to put nothing in this field, right? It has to equal
correct. Exactly.
Okay.
And super important, everything in here is initially treated as a string. So if you have to do numeric or other things like that, you need to do a little, and they have a really good example here. You have to convert that piece of data. So data is what's being fed in, the value of this field right here, but it's text. So first I'm creating or converting it to numeric and then doing my stuff here. So otherwise it won't make sense from that standpoint. Now, if you have something else, you can use validation XBasic but this is going to call back the server to do this execution. So you can still trigger it when they leave the field,
Yeah.
but the downside is you have to go to the server. But the benefit is when you go to the server, you can refer to session variables. You could do database lookups. You could get crazy with what I do. But again, need to be connected to be able to do that. So I would probably lean towards some kind of,
So,
if you're looking at other fields on the interface, this one right here.
so in that setting that you had down in, which was to publish the session variables, and then you defined what the session variables were, is this a two-way street, or is this, I'm just going to tell you what the session variable is right now, but you're not really allowed to set it, which I imagine is probably
Right. No, you really can't set it here.
Okay. Yep.
What you can do is when you get to the server side, the after dialog validate, I could say e.control or e.data submitted dot control session dot control is equal to. So basically, I'm just going to pull it, the value of that field, and then update my session at that time. So essentially, I'm writing that session variables, but this will only occur after they submit the form. If it changes on the server will have no way of knowing about that.
That makes sense because these session variables are server side. So
yes,
that makes sense. Great. Well, we have like 8 minutes
good questions,
left, and we had terrific questions, but we're out of questions. So I think we should give everyone about a minute to type in questions, because that's often how this works. And if not, then I think everyone understands all that needs to be understood.
I do want to share this. Thank you,
sure.
Sarah.
Okay.
And actually, if we have a few moments, so what you can do is you can actually, if you'll notice, you can use actual JavaScript functions. So when I go here, and let me go into data 2, you'll notice I kind of focused on when I go to the show height expression here, but you can use a JavaScript function where you can call a function. So if you have something pretty sophisticated, you could actually, instead of trying to write the syntax here, which sometimes can be a little problematic, you can actually create a JavaScript function, call it here and pass in the information, and therefore you can use all the power of JavaScript and write it in JavaScript versus this kind of pseudo language that we use. So there are certain situations like you may want to look at the current time, date stamp, and things like that for reasons for you want to do that there.
Excellent.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was a good catch.
Yep. And for those of you who didn't see that, in the chat window, Sarah has pasted in the link to the JavaScript function and documentation for setting up a validation like that. Cool. All right, let me pop back over to questions, see if any more have come in, and if not, okay, here's one. I don't know if you know how to do this one, but here's how to dynamically overlay an existing PDF with a custom watermark.
Oh, okay. So I'm gonna jump over here to here. So you have an existing PDF and you want to overlay from there. So let's go there. The way I've seen before is that there are some PDF manipulation functions in here, and potentially they're able to do it here. Often what we're doing is we're like creating a report and then saving it as a PDF. In this situation where you're reading the PDF and then creating another PDF, I'd have to look into a little bit more how we pull that kind of thing out. But there are a bunch of functions for working with PDFs. So for instance, you can encrypt a PDF, or are these desktop? Make sure I'm not sending desktop stuff there. But you can do things like append PDF, so you can append a page from there. I'm not sure about watermark. Let's see if there's something down here. But let me go ahead, I'm gonna go ahead and, oops, I'm not gonna copy that. I'm gonna copy this, go in there and put that in for everybody. There you go. But possibly you could use one of these functions, like you can merge two PDF files together, but I'm not sure about a watermark. That's kind of an interesting function that, you can add it when you actually create the PDF. There's ways to put those watermarks in it, I'm very sure. But as far as a watermark, let's see, water. Oh, wait, okay. PDF from converts a bitmap file into a PDF file. And it says, typically this function is used to create a file will be used for it.
So
So
if you
check out that.
converted a PDF to a bitmap and then converted it back, you might be able to slip the watermark in there.
Yeah, because I think there's a function like merge. I'm not sure if it's, yeah, okay, like here's PDF merge, contents with a base file. Oh, okay, yeah. So this is how you would do it. You'd use the PDF merge function, because that allows you to take one PDF, then you have another PDF, which would be you've created with your bitmap watermark, and overlay them together, and the transparency should work. So check out PDF underscore merge. It's a little XBasic you have to do, but it's not too bad. Again, it happens on the server side, but it gives you the ability to modify that. Great question.
Fantastic. That looks like about it. Dion, thanks very much for
Thank
presenting
you.
today.
Fun session
All of
today. Thank you,
Yeah,
everybody.
great session. And thanks, folks, for keeping it lively. If you do have further questions, go ahead and send them to guides, GUIDES at alphasoftware.com. So thanks again, Dion, for presenting. Thank you, Sarah,
My pleasure.
for being here and giving us the correct answers in the back channels here. Hope to see you next Wednesday. Take care and be well. Bye-bye.